Welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. I am very excited to have my guest today, Monique Hoving-Smeets. Monique, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. It's awesome to be here.
Appreciate that. So Monique is a trauma therapist based on Vancouver Island, but of Dutch origin. She works in a private practice called RelationshipWorx. That's Relationship, WORX. Professionally, over the last 3 to 4 years, she has organically been developing an integrative trauma treatment that is now fully actualized, and she's now offering training in this modality. Her private practice focuses on trauma therapy to the general public as well as therapists. Monique, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that introduction.
You're welcome. So before we get going here, Monique, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Right. So yeah, I was born in the Netherlands and lived there until I was about 18. Then due to my early career in tourism, I lived across the different countries in Europe, working in Greece, London, Cyprus, and then meeting my husband back in the Netherlands, we actually decided that we wanted to travel Australia and New Zealand. That actually led us to migrating to Australia. And so we then lived there for about 11 years. And once we kind of settled there, it wasn't a great cultural fit for me. And so then we decided that, okay, there's one more country that we can actually try as European citizens to migrate to, and that was Canada. And so we've been here now for 8 years and absolutely loving it. And living on Vancouver Island, honestly, it's such a dream. It's so stunning here.
Look at you. My God.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, look, so how did all this start for you? I mean, you mentioned you had a previous career in tourism. So take us through this journey.
Yeah. So basically, once I returned to Holland, I actually started working at a recruitment agency where basically I started to obviously interact with people who were affected by not having employment or looking at changing careers. And in a nutshell, that kind of really led me to having conversations with people about their life. Right? Like how it was actually affecting them and what their life was like. And I start to really feel drawn to wanting to help them more than just help them find a job. And that really led me to consider studying therapy. So once we actually migrated to Australia or immigrated to Australia, that's where I started studying counseling and started to become a therapist and worked in Australia as a therapist. And so that was basically my journey. And one of the things that I wasn't trained in was marriage and family therapy. And I realized that was requiring some additional studying. Mm-hmm. And so once we then actually moved to Canada, I actually did my master's in marriage and family therapy. And so when I took my master's, I realized that there was so little training in trauma, like just as the general training in the master's program. So I took additional training in trauma therapy and the different modalities. And once I even started into my practicum, I started to encounter like really significant trauma, that clients were affected by. And thankfully, I had already worked 3 years as a therapist in Australia prior to coming to do my master's here. Mm-hmm. So I didn't feel as ill-equipped in general as a brand new therapist. But I started to really see the depth of the impact of complex trauma for clients and start to really understand the lack of training and what it was really that it was requiring on our part as a therapist to really help these clients efficiently. So that was basically the beginning of that.
Let me ask you something here. So your transition from your previous career to begin working with people was there just always an interest for you in talking to people? I know being in tourism, you're talking to people, but certainly on a different level.
Yes.
What was it that about you? What was it about engaging with people on that other level that really compelled you to want to become a therapist?
Yeah, I think that I could really see people being stuck. So when we had these conversations at a recruitment agency, so in the Netherlands and in other countries in Europe, it's basically a shop front where people walk in and they sit down and they register their interest for job seeking. And I just really saw that their lifespan and how they were impacted by life in general, but also how often they were stuck. And so there was something in me that I was like, such a strong desire to help people reach a good quality of life. And I think, honestly, that is still what I so aim for when I work with people is that, we only have one life, at least here, for as far as we know. And I want you to make the rest of your life the best of your life.
Mm.
And how can I at least help you figure out what that looks like for you? And, we deserve to have a good quality of life. But when we are affected by trauma, that is such a struggle for people. And so that really drew me into the therapy work for helping people to develop a better quality of life, whatever that looks like for people. And obviously that looks differently for people.
Mm-hmm. And then, switching to working with people who've experienced trauma and even focusing on trauma is another shift in and of itself. How was that for you?
Yeah, that was really interesting because I started to notice that, even from the get-go, that the clients that started to show up in my therapy room, both in Australia, but then also at my practicum, had significant trauma. And I was just like, that there was something about it that when I looked at the landscape of how this affected them, that actually drew me even more to wanting to figure out, what are all the elements that are required to really sufficiently help people? Because people are not just affected at one level. They're not just impacted on their, let's say, daily functioning. They're affected by accessing their emotions. They're affected by disconnecting from their body and not wanting to even, sometimes know that their body is even there. The way that their thoughts and emotions really start to change as a result, their whole nervous system and the way their brain functioned. And so just listening to the comprehensiveness of how trauma affected all layers of a human really got me curious, what is it that we're not doing that really helps to cater for all these different levels? And so that really got me to search for what is it that we need a therapist to really effectively help these people.
I like that insight about how trauma really affects or impacts people on a lot of different levels. But before we go there, how did it sit with you personally hearing about this trauma, or realizing that all these people were impacted by trauma? I mean, that can be difficult for a lot of people.
To be honest, because I work with pretty severe trauma, even including satanic ritual abuse, people that live with, the impact of dissociative disorders. What was really hard about that for me as a person is to actually come to terms with honestly, the evil that actually exists on this planet. That was a pretty big shock, that learning about such cruelties as in ritual abuse and, cult abuse, all those kind of pieces. It was another layer to really come to terms with that, wow, this is what other humans are capable of doing to other people. I think that was really hard at first to really come to terms with that. And I think, which is why I feel so drawn to really try to make a difference. I want people to know that there is hope. I want people to know that there is somewhat of a way out.
Mm-hmm.
And not obviously just for that group, but for, all the clients that I work with, and they're wide and varied in terms of what they've experienced. But yeah, it was that piece that really made me even want to, quote unquote, fight harder to find an answer, a way through this chaos for clients.
You mentioned that you were wondering, how can we help people? What are we not doing? So how did things unfold for you? How did your understanding of what you could do, what help could be offered, how did that unfold for you?
Yeah. So during my master's program, I took training in emotion focus therapy, in family systems therapy, because obviously it was a marriage and family therapy course. So you really look at the systemic impact. I had been taught a couple modalities and family modalities. And when I started working with clients, what I found is that using these modalities in and of themselves were not causing change to the point that it really made a difference in people's lives. So then once I finished my master's, I took a training that actually is a training that works one eye at a time. It's actually developed here in Canada. And as I started to work with one eye open at a time, and using some of their techniques, I started to be exposed instantly to all the layers that I was just talking about. Because with one eye open, I literally could see how the body was responding differently. The facial expressions changed, the thoughts and the emotions started to change. And that really started to clue me in, like, we can't let clients go to one modality, to a therapist that uses a one approach, and then hope that the rest of the parts of being human will just follow, right? So if I'm helping you work with vulnerability and having access to your emotions, but then what happens to your brain and what happens to your body, right? And so I started to really see that me applying like the modalities that I had learned really required integration, because of what I was seeing when I started working one eye at a time.
What is one eye at a time? What is that?
So literally when you cover one eye, your brain actually accesses your entire system in ways that I had not seen before. So the techniques that I further shaped and developed originally come from a therapy or a technique that's called OEI. And that was developed here in Canada. And so once I actually started to change the application and enhance these techniques, what we start to notice is that, so when you cover one eye, your nervous system does not respond the same as when you switch to the other side. It's like an instant switch. And what I start to notice is that when you talk about compartmentalization and working with parts, I had not had prior parts training, but in Australia, I had taken DID training. And so what I started to see is that it was almost like all my clients had parts show up. So, for example, if a client said to me, let's focus on, I don't know, my trauma about carrots. Let's just not make it triggering for this episode, right? And so I would then ask them to cover one eye, and I would say, okay, so how does this side feel about that experience, being afraid of carrots?
How does this side?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes. So this side, as in with that eye open, and I now know that depending on the level of dissociation and compartmentalization, there can be multiple parts on one eye, so connected to the left eye, but there's different parts that are connected to the right eye.
Wow.
Which is honestly like, it flabbergasted me, because ask the person, okay, so on this side, how does this side feel about, your fear of carrots? And that part would say to me, fear of carrots? I don't know what you're talking about. And I thought, hang on, didn't you just with both eyes open tell me this is what you wanted to work on?
Right.
And I said, oh, so this side isn't afraid of carrots. No, I have no idea what you're talking about. And I'd be like, would you be okay if I check what the other side feels about that and how the other side feels? So then I would ask permission to sweat. And then all of a sudden, this side would start to dissociate and be completely overwhelmed and say, oh, and the voice would instantly change. Nervous system would change. The voice would change. And that part would go, I'm absolutely terrified of carrots. And so in that process, I started to realize that because each side holds different parts, they're not on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to be neurologically not connected in the same way. And that goes through literally the layers of emotions, of thoughts, body responses, and even memories. And that became so interesting for me because with both eyes open, people would say to me, yes, I would really like to work through this. It's going to be hard.
Mm-hmm.
But then by the time I would switch to the other eye, I would find out that eye didn't even want to talk about it.
Wow.
And that started to shape what I now call the permission process. And so the modality that I've developed exists of 3 core processes. And I started to literally ask, so with the left eye open, how do you even feel about the fact that we want to talk about the carrots?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, of course, because, I've been dealing with this for 20 years. I'd really like to get rid of this problem. And then I'd go to the other side, and the other side goes, oh, that's a terrible idea. No. If we're going to have to feel the feelings about that, we're going to be so overwhelmed, we won't be able to handle this. And so I literally started to shape, okay, so if this side is really scared, that makes so much sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to know that we won't do anything until we have your full permission to go ahead. I honestly, people bawl their eyes out, even just saying that I will not push ahead until we have full permission from both sides. So clients started to really teach me the significance of never doing any trauma work until we have permission from all parts. But with one eye covered, you ask the question, how does this side feel about that? Are there any hesitations or worries if we're going to, focus on this and possibly try to heal this? And so in that permission process, I then ask parts, what would it take? What would they need, either from me or from the other side, the neighboring eye, in order to make this process safe? And that has become one part of the TRIP approach, and it literally has changed the way I do therapy significantly.
No, I mean, what comes up obviously is a reference to parts work in and of itself, right? Internal family systems. What I'm noticing here is when you close one eye, when one eye is covered, what is this? There's the invitation for just one other part. How do you allow for more parts than just?
Right. Yeah. So interestingly enough, is that it's almost like depending on what you've chosen to work on or what the client has chosen to work on, it's like all the parts that are connected to that can show up. And what I mean by that is that depending on the level of dissociation, what I call the presenting self might say to me, oh, that's so weird. I hear this voice say, oh, I remember that experience, and I was 5 years old and I was left really alone. And so it's almost like the person can either represent and speak for the part, what they're hearing, but it's like there's instant access to the part that is related to that experience.
Mm-hmm.
What sometimes happens is that as we switch to the other side, sometimes new parts come to the surface. They don't even know what we're talking about. So in one of my last sessions last week, we were processing, and then all of a sudden I moved back to the other eye. And a part said, "Could you please explain what we're doing here? Because I have no idea what you're talking about." And so I then have to wheel it back and kind of go, "Oh, well, welcome. Do you even want to be here? Do you want to be part of this conversation?" So I kind of really asked that permission again.
Mm-hmm.
And would you like me to explain what it is that we do here? And then if they feel that this experience matters to them, they'll stay. And if I say, well, if this experience doesn't relate to you or it doesn't matter to you, feel free to go to the background and we'll just continue what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So, so in that way, multiple parts can show up.
Right.
And there is space for, all parts to show up, but it typically seems to whoever is connected to the experience tends to be at the front.
Now, is this modality specifically for people who've experienced interpersonal abuse or what?
So far, I literally have used it with any kind of developmental trauma, incidental trauma, complex trauma. Like, I work with clients that have disordered eating. I have clients with severe anxiety, depression. The range that I've tried this with clients is literally across the board.
Wow.
And I saw on your site that you do a training in early psychosis.
I was studying early psychosis. Yeah, I was working in a facility for a while ago. Yeah.
So, and you may be interested in this. So I have done I've experienced some one-off experiences that I can't sort of validate until we know a little bit more about the research. So I was in a situation where somebody was experiencing an active psychotic episode. And my brain went, hang on, because in my training for therapists, I have the trauma eye, which is basically the eye that's directly connected to the experience. And we notice that the other eye tends to be more connected to the here and now. Mm-hmm. So when you hear these parts talk differently about that experience, it's often where the part is literally directly experiencing that. And the other eye will then say, I don't really know. This is not me. I'm not the one that has anxiety. So knowing that I differentiate between what I call the trauma eye and the calm eye, and trying to make sense of how the brain operates. When this person was in psychotic episode, I literally ran to the person and I thought, what if it's possible that the psychosis is only connected to the one eye and not the other? So I literally went to lay down on the floor, trying to figure out, could I see? Because I've learned to really watch eyes and see what happens. And the person was screaming. They were in a very catatonic state. They were calling, that something was very dangerous and that everything was on fire. Mm. And so I kept saying, can you close one eye? Can you please close one eye? No. And there was like really intense. I don't want to replicate the voice for privacy purposes, but also for the intensity. It was like a demonic voice, like screaming. Mm. I kept trying a few times and I said, can you just try closing one eye for me? Guy, honestly, like all of a sudden, the person squeezed their eye. Instantly, they recognized me and they started crying. They said, "Oh, Monique, I am so scared." She's like, what the heck?
Is this in your office?
No, this was literally where I was living at the time. It was in a home that we were renting. It was the person upstairs having. And I'm just like, no way. So I'm here like regulating the person, calming them down. And I said, help is on its way. Just slow here. Just look at me. I'm here with you. You're not alone. But of course, I couldn't help to think about what about the other eye? Where did that psychotic episode go? Where did the psychosis go? Mm-hmm. And I said, would you be willing to close this eye so we can check in on the other eye? And the person closed the calm eye. And Guy, honestly, instantly the psychosis was back. The person started screaming, yelling, fire, really scared. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's true. I got him to switch eyes 3 times, and all of a sudden he's like, oh, Monique, I'm back. It was, and thankfully before the ambulances came, we were able to get him back to his regular state.
Wow.
That to me was mind-blowing. And so knowing what I've kind of learned over time, I've developed these 3 processes that help to integrate the left side with the right side through the different processes that I've developed. And what it focuses on is to kind of rebuilding an internal attached self. Mm-hmm. And so it's, all I can say, it's been a whirlwind of discoveries. And one of my clients is fully blind, has 2 artificial eyes, does not have an optic nerve. And I have figured out a way to make this work for her.
Of course you have. Wait, what is this modality called?
It's called TRIP. So I've called it trauma TRIP, TRIP.
Okay.
And it stands for trauma regulation and integration process. Because this entire process really focuses on every step gets regulated through leaning on emotion-focused work, through going into somatic strategies, by using the switching techniques, and making sense of it from an attachment lens. And so then every step of the way, we regulate and very gently work towards integration. Mm-hmm. And because I draw from these different therapeutic modalities, it is absolutely an integrative approach that allows to cater for the thoughts, for the emotions, for the body, the brain, and the eyes. Like it literally encompasses, or is kind of like, how do I say? It facilitates a process where all aspects that make us human, that are impacted by trauma, are catered for.
Mm-hmm. What is going on neurologically when we cover one eye?
Right?
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. So at what point would you invite someone to cover one eye?
So basically, once when I have a new client, and typically I get referrals for trauma, I will do an intake. We obviously talk about what they would like to process. I will actually explain how the brain and the eyes are differently connected, and how each eye is differently wired to the emotion, thoughts, body experiences, and what they can expect. Mm-hmm. So once they say to me with both eyes open, okay, here is, the landscape of what I've gone through. We either pick a particular experience, but it can also be just a physical sensation. You don't have to have a memory. You do not have to have a specific memory. You can literally say to me, I don't know why, but the smell of peanut butter just has me, in a terrible state. Right. And so we can kind of go, okay, we may not know what this is connected to. And then we go, okay, with both eyes open, you would like to try this. And then I will go, okay, well, let's get started. And would you mind just covering which eye? You get to choose. And so then they choose which eye they'd like to cover first. Now, I was going to give you a heads up because I could see you trying to cover one eye. So the first process that I haven't spoken about is the projection process. And the reason why I just briefly want to mention it, when you cover one eye, if you have trauma that is not resolved, one eye will typically instantly see the world differently. And so my appearance might actually change for a client.
Wow.
That ranges from mild to wild, which is why I was kind of getting a little bit of a panic attack. Well, not a panic attack, but when I saw you cover the eye, I'm like, oh, be gentle, because you might experience something that I haven't actually spoken about. One of the things that we know is that one eye, which is often the dominant eye, but not always, that eye tends to be connected to the nervous system in different ways. And I'm currently having conversations with somebody in the neuroscience field to really figure out more about why this happens. So what tends to happen is, so when you cover one eye, is that eye might actually see me and the world different visually, physically, and emotionally. And I have clients report to me that they say to me, oh, all of a sudden your head looks really big, Monique. Or they go, you literally look like a ghost and I am terrified of you. My heart is racing right now. So what I do is I actually regulate the nervous system by going, okay, I know you're really scared right now. Would you like me to come closer or would you like me to back up? And so I let the client give me a sense of what do they think they need. And so we check in with the body and they go, I just feel so tense right now. So I might back up. I work mainly online. So I will literally roll my chair backwards and you can physically see how their nervous system starts to shift. So we actually regulate the nervous system to a safe place. When they then switch to the other side, they go, oh, thank God, you just look like you did before. And so what it has taught me is that your eyes, with both eyes open, they do not perceive the world the same. They do not perceive danger and safety the same way.
Is that because of a neurological reason? I mean, are the eyes, the eyes are kind of connected to opposite sides of the brain, right?
Yeah, they're both. So there is one. So basically the optic chiasm basically kind of splits. So there's one that goes from your left to the right part of the brain, but it also has a connection from the eye that goes to the same part of the brain. One of the things that I'm currently figuring out, because the amygdala is actually two parts, right? You have a left and a right hemisphere amygdala. So what I'm trying to figure out is how is each eye differently connected to the amygdala and then to the hippocampus, because of how each eye accesses different memories, different experiences, including the body completely can respond differently in that moment. And so my quest at the moment is to really get more neuroscientific understanding about why this works the way that it does. And so I actually have a professor joining me on this journey right now who's kind of wanting to help me figure this out.
Wow,
so that's really cool.
Really interesting. And it makes a lot of sense to me too. Are you finding that when people cover the right eye more or the left eye more, is there any kind of
No, I've been trying to track that. There does not seem to be much consistency at all.
Right.
And so one of the things that was good for me to learn is that this whole left brain, right brain concept is actually a myth, which actually really helped me feel relieved, because I do not see a consistency in how, if it's the left eye that, impacts people more in a certain way, or the right eye. So I have not had that observation. And so when I learned that actually is a myth, I was like, oh gosh, thank goodness, that makes sense to me. And there's so much that we don't know about how the nervous system gets impacted by cues from the outside, right? And obviously, if the nervous system gets activated, then the signals to your body are going to change. So to kind of put it in perspective, so let's say that, you had a car accident and you were not able to exit, right? When we talk about somatic strategies, that your body has had to mobilize in either the fight or flight in order to have kind of at least resolved some part of that trauma experience. So what happens is that when I have somebody come who has been in an accident, I literally asked him, can you cover one eye for me? And can you just move your legs for me? Can you just march like on the spot as you're sitting in a chair or standing? If it's the trauma eye that's open, we will typically find out that the body can't move. It has difficulty moving. It's really slow in its motor movements. I then get them to switch to the other side, meaning covering the other eye. And I ask them to do the same thing. And all of a sudden, those same legs now can move as if the accident never happened. So all of a sudden, just with a switch of an eye, your body is functioning and responding without the impact of the accident. And as a little side trail, I've worked with a gentleman here on Vancouver Island who had a stroke. And prior to the stroke, had a car accident. And he kind of got stuck in his rehabilitation. And I said to him, look, I've never tried this with stroke. I honestly can't promise you anything. But if we know what stroke does, then we know that there's something that is misfiring in the brain. Again, it was one of those experiences that left us both like almost like not screaming, but kind of being excited. I asked him, could you please cover one eye for me and just show me, a movement that you normally can't do, because his arm and his hands are, like paralyzed. His hand cannot like direct and grasp. We covered one eye and his hand was floppy. It could not grab my hand and it didn't have strength. And then literally as we covered the other eye, his hand opened. He was able to grab my hand and squeezed it. We were like, what on earth? I literally ran down the stairs, grabbed his wife, and said, you have to come and look at this.
Wow.
And so he did say to me, like, I have a fear of falling since I've had this stroke. And sure enough, we covered one eye, and I said, so on this side, do you notice that fear of falling? He goes, no, I feel really stable. And he was able to march on the spot. Then he switched to the other side, and it was almost instant, as if he fell, and instantly the terror was there. And so these kind of discoveries really, as you can imagine, just had my brain in pieces. Like, how am I going to knit these pieces back together? And one of the techniques that I started to develop is what I call the quick flash. So with the eye that has access to the body in a healthy way, or to healthy thoughts, or to truths, let's say, one eye believes it's all your fault. And with that, the whole body kind of stiffens up. I get you to cover that eye that basically can't believe that. So we leave the eye open that says to me, yes, it's not my fault. My body feels calm. I can move my body. And then I have the person go open and close, literally like a peekaboo movement. And then as I started to do that, instantly the person actually, they say to me, like, it feels like a little tsunami that hits the calm side. And then after doing that a few times, we switched back. And then the person goes, well, maybe it's not my fault. Maybe I consider that. And then we would switch back and then keep using the quick flash until that part all of a sudden went like, oh my goodness, of course it wasn't my fault. And then you see the whole nervous system and the body just change and absorb that truth at an emotional level, at a thought level, and at a somatic level.
There seems to be from my perspective, kind of an obvious connection between like brain spotting and EMDR, where you're kind of going back.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really interesting and really exciting, quite frankly.
Yes. And honestly, it's a little bit scary because I'm a nobody, right? Like, I'm just sitting here on little Vancouver Island, developing these processes, combining these methodologies. And
yeah, but you know what? As you say that, I'm just reminded of my interviews with Judith Herman, who was
right.
nobody. She was a researcher.
Right.
She was working with people, and she started noticing things like you did. Or
Right.
Dr. Patricia Resick, who developed the other modality that I just interviewed. But she noticed things. You're noticing things, which is really exciting.
Yes. And it's hard, right? Like I do my sessions, and typically what a trip session looks like is I do the projection process where I check, how do you observe me on this side? How does your body respond on this side? Do I need to move backwards or come closer? So we actually make sure that both eyes feel regulated. And through the entire session, I will constantly change my distance to meet the needs of the nervous system for each eye. Mm-hmm. Then we move into the permission process and obtain that permission if we get there. And then once we have the permission, we go into what I call the compassion process. And that's basically where we go into the layers of the trauma. So on this side, what's this experience with the trauma? Is that the same as the other side? Mm-hmm. And two key pieces from an attachment perspective that are so crucial in TRIP is that I've discovered that typically on the one eye, there are the parts that stay connected at all costs. So from an attachment perspective, their behavior, their thoughts, and their emotions function even to stay connected with an environment that's not healthy, or to meet the expectation of a family of origin member that is still in their mind, trying to meet their expectation. But then when we switch to the other side, that side tends to operate from a staying protected at all costs. Mm-hmm. And that side might function like, oh, I don't care who you are, but you wronged me once and I'm going to cut you off. Mm-hmm. So now you have this internal conflict. And my belief is that it actually comes often as a result of self-abandonment as part of trauma. It's the minute that we have to leave what we need and how we feel and what matters to us when our environment actually demands for us to leave us and focus on them or due to fear, whatever happens, we abandon ourselves due to what happens in the environment. So in the compassion process, we figure out which side wants to stay connected at all cost, which side wants to stay protected at all cost, and what do we do to help them very, very gently come on the same page so that they can actually be compassionate towards each other. Mm-hmm. Because the left side sometimes might say, oh my gosh, is the other side still dealing with this? Why is the other side still scared? It was 30 years ago. Like, I really don't know why the other side is still struggling with this. There is so much judgment coming from one eye, often to the other side. Wow. So there is no compassion on the inside because of what they've learned in attachment on the outside.
Wow. Monique.
Yeah,
there's something exciting about it. I kind of want to I want to do this.
Yes.
All right, look, we got to wind down here. Okay. Really, really interesting. So are you obviously, what are your services that you're offering for people?
Yeah, so basically, I work with the general public as well as therapists, and I offer trainings for therapists. We actually have one coming up in June. And so it's basically a hybrid training where it's access to an online platform, and we do a 3-day live online training, and where you get to practice these processes so that literally that once you've done the training, you can move on Monday into your room and start using this. Mm-hmm. And so what therapists start to experience when they do the training is they go, oh my gosh, I've been working through my own trauma in so many different ways, and it didn't work. Mm-hmm. So they often actually sign up to do TRIP, either with myself or with my colleague, my practice colleague, Meryl. We're both Dutch, and we're both very excited about TRIP. And so we actually cater a lot for therapists to come and join us in experiencing this. Mm. And the feedback that I get is that therapists often say to me, TRIP seems to work when nothing else does. Now, I find it a little bit hard to hear, as like I said, like I'm a nobody, right? Just for somebody to say, this works when nothing else works. I find that a little bit hard to accept at this point. But I know for me, it's true when I work with my clients because of the change that I see that happen for them.
Well, once again, I'm speaking with Monique Hoving-Smeets. The website is RelationshipWorx. That's relationship, and then works is spelled WORX. We'll have that linked up at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com, as well as the link for the workshop that's coming up in June, too. We'll have that linked up. Monique, wow. Really exciting to me. And I have to say, I love the way you talked about how you work. I mean, there was a lot of invitation and asking of permission and going slow and, working with kind of conversing with both sides and kind of all of the good and I think well-respected best practices in a sense of what we've come to learn about a lot of different modalities. So awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So best way for people to get in contact with you, is that the website or what?
Yeah, so website or email. So the email is monique@relationshipworx-therapy.com. We also have a Facebook group. It's the TRIP Facebook group. So it's TRIP, Trauma Regulation and Integration Process. And so we do have a Facebook group that if people are curious, to find out more or even connect with therapists who've taken the training, right? Like I always believe that it's better to kind of hear how other therapists have experienced it so that you don't have to take it from me, but, check with other therapists, how they have felt, what the training was like and how they're using that. We're actually rolling out a first research project, which is really exciting. So we've trained a batch of therapists, and we're now going to invite their clients to fill in their experiences through surveys over the next 6 to 12 months to actually figure out, is this valid? Does this integrative approach have any merit? Is there really a need to combine, these different therapeutic elements so that clients don't have to go, to 5 different therapists to receive the integrative care, the holistic care that they're needing. Yeah. And so that's very exciting that's coming up.
Awesome. Well, awesome. Great to meet you. And I look forward to getting this out there. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Guy.
All right. Bye-bye.
Take good care. Bye.